Hello, everybody. My name is Adam Thorne, and welcome to the Australian Aviation Podcast. We are down one host, or in fact, down two hosts from last week, as Jake is away. He's been to Canberra for the last few days. So, hello, Jake, if you're listening. But that meant I am joined just by Chris Fenton, the man that's held every job in aviation and now holds the most important job in aviation. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Adam. And yourself?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good to hear, my friend. Good to hear.
Now, it's been another busy week of aviation news, but before we steam into the more serious stories of the week, there is one story that we wrote that I wanted to give a bit of a shout out to. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, part of the reason we ran this story was because we've had a long weekend, and I don't want to break the fourth wall, but we sometimes sort of schedule stories in advance to feel that for that Monday, because it was a bank holiday Monday. Oh, it was bank holiday Monday. It was a bank holiday in New South Wales, but not everywhere else. And this story is a World War II RAF veteran who was presented with a letter of congratulations from a Chief of Air Force to mark his 100th birthday. And apologies if I pronounced his name wrong. Leo Ellis was also given a framed image of a 100 Squadron boomerang with a message of congratulations from a commanding officer of the squadron. Now, the reason I like this story so much, and it is a nice story generally, is that this man is the best-looking 100-year-old I've ever seen in my life. Not only does he not look 100, and in fact, I'm suspicious as to whether he actually is 100. I don't want to question his integrity, but he could totally pass for 70. He's also the best-dressed 100-year-old man I've seen in my life. Like, he looks exceptionally good.
He looks extremely well for his age.
And I'm not saying this, I'm not joking. This isn't like a patronising thing. He just looks great. He's wearing this fantastic kind of cream turtleneck jumper underneath his lovely navy suit. If you are listening, congratulations on hitting 100. If you do fancy coming on the show, not that a man of his prestige would sully himself with me and you, but if he does, we'd love to have you. But anyway,
some stories,
yes,
that's for sure.
Go on the website and check it out. He looks fantastic, and I also think this is a lovely thing for the RAF to do.
Yeah.
We mentioned in the story how the Air Force kind of reach out to older veterans and try and mark occasions like this, which I think is a really good initiative. Have you got, before we crack into the news, Chris, have you got any shout-outs, any fan mail?
I've got no shout-outs, no fan mail this week. They must have been on a long weekend with us.
Maybe it's just because they feel so intimidated by your fame now, the growing stature.
It could be. But look, if you do want a shout-out, if you do want to get a mention, feel free to reach out on socials. We'll happily give you a special shout-out.
Right, okay. Well, now we will steam into the news. And unfortunately, this week, we've got no Jake. Not only do we not have Jake on the show, we've not actually had Jake writing news stories for the last 4 or 5 weeks, which has meant that I've had to put on the rubber gloves and actually do some work, which is something I really, really don't enjoy. And it's also, unfortunately for me, been a really, really busy week of news because this was almost a week ago now. You had Qantas appear at the Senate inquiry, which is, it's got some fancy title, but it's basically kind of a telling off of Qantas Senate inquiry. It's on the surface meant to be about the decision by the federal government to block Qatar putting on additional flights. But in reality, it's just a complete beatdown of Qantas. And so at this Senate hearing, you have the new CEO, Vanessa Hudson, along with Richard Goer, the chairman, and also they had like their legal officer there as well. And they got an absolute telling off. And there was a lot of posturing and there was a lot of grandstanding. We didn't really strike a kind of definitive blow. And I was really disappointed watching it because the Qantas representative did that classic politicians thing of not answering the question, moving it on. And I can see why they did that. But it didn't come across too well. However, the star witness, the star performer, was in fact the CEO of Virgin Australia, Jane Hardlicker, who came out with some incredible kind of bombshell revelations. She basically said in relation to Qatar being having their extra flights rejected, that she had 2 meetings with the Transport Minister regarding this issue. One of them was earlier the year in January, and she basically said that she left that meeting, under the impression, she chose her words very carefully, but very much convinced that these extra flights to Qatar were going to go ahead. Now, Virgin has skin in the game on this one because they have a code-share agreement with Qatar. So the more Qatar flights they can get in, the more follow-on domestic Virgin flights they will get. And she said she was completely shocked when she found out sort of 6 months later or so that the government had basically changed its mind. However, she was told, or she claims she was told by Catherine King, the Transport Minister herself, that Alan Joyce was not happy about the decision. And so she's insinuated quite strongly that the maestro, Alan Joyce, weaved his magic, his incredible lobbying clout, and got this decision changed. You obviously are essentially a close friend of the Joycey.
Joycey, yeah.
What do you think of this, Chris? Is this the sort of thing? I mean, it's quite a big claim for her to make.
Look, I think it's an extremely big claim for Jane to make, and I guess the reality is only 2 people know what happened in that room, Catherine King or Joycey. Did Qantas lobby against Qatar being granted extra flights? Absolutely, that's common knowledge. Is it looking likely that Joycey had a bigger say or bigger swing with the government than what everyone is being led to believe? Look, highly likely, but I think it's a big claim for Jane to come out and say. And I also think it kind of highlights that these CEOs are quite powerful people at the end of the day. Jane has admitted that she had a meeting with Catherine King earlier in the year and walked out from that meeting pretty much convinced Qatar were going to be granted the extra flights. So, these CEOs have a bit too much power. They
do. And it also shows the incredible clout that airlines have power almost beyond the size of their companies, because if you were Alan Joyce or perhaps Vanessa Hudson now or Jane Hardlicker, you do have you have access to meetings with the Prime Minister. So this is where it all gets a little bit murky. But like you say, we don't necessarily know what happened or didn't happen. So that was earlier in the day. And then later in the day, I said we had Qantas come in there to take their telling off. I would say that the various... so it was Senator Bridget McKenzie. She... I'm trying to think what is the appropriate word I can use. She gave them a very stern telling off, but there was a lot of, I've got to say on Qantas' side, a lot of posturing, a lot of grandstanding, loving every second of doing this. And I kind of felt they were more concerned about how they came across than they did asking the incisive questions. But even though the maestro has moved on, it was still all the talk in this was about Alan Joyce, his long shadow cast all over this. And there was a very interesting moment where the Qantas chairman, Richard Goer, told the Senate that he is, quote, not going to walk away from Alan Joyce. And he also defended his former CEO's record. So he said, I think Alan Joyce did an excellent job as CEO over 15 years in what was a very demanding industry. And while he did acknowledge that things had gone wrong, recently and that there are improvements that needed to be made, he also did a pretty staunch defence of how the airline handled COVID. And I'm going to read you out the quotes here. He said, I think the most significant challenge we've had at Qantas is the existential threat we face through COVID. And I think the board and the management handled that situation as well as we possibly could. The most challenging circumstances of all time. Our major competitor went broke, went into administration, leaving $7 billion out of pocket for creditors. We navigated through that. Our shareholders supported us. We retained the confidence of the capital markets, the debt and equity markets, and without that, we had no future. So I think the most significant challenge that the board has had in my time as chair, we actually navigated very well. Now, clearly, we've got issues that we need to deal with. We've got a new CEO, and Vanessa is being very upfront with our customers and our people on what we need to do. I find this fascinating because on the one hand, Qantas are in a bind, right? On the one hand, they do think, I think correctly, that in a lot of ways they've done really, really well. They also believe that a lot of the things that have gone wrong aren't their fault And they clearly aren't necessarily that sorry about these things because they think it's things out of their control. But at the same time, they almost are forced now publicly to keep saying, we're sorry, we're sorry, we're sorry. So they're in a bind. I do think that he's got a point. And like we've spoken about on this show before, people focus in on the problems at Qantas, but they forget that actually we still have an airline, which 3 years ago we didn't know we'd have at all.
Correct.
What's your assessment of that? It does feel that they're not going to throw Joyce under the bus now he's gone. They are going to stick by him for the time being.
Look, I think for the time being they're sticking by him, and further down the line we'll probably see that songbook change to a different tune. I think what Richard Goer is doing right now is trying to protect his own job. And
that's what I was going to say.
I'm kind of the belief that hey ho ho, Richard, you've got to go. I'm a Qantas investor, shareholder, and I get a vote in the AGM, and my vote's you've got to go.
It's interesting because the argument is that there's two ways of looking at it. One is that if you're the chairperson or whatever, the buck stops with you. And regardless of whether you were directly involved in these things, as a matter of responsibility, a word we seem to have forgotten in society now, but anyway, you have to go. But his argument would be, I haven't personally done anything wrong, and actually more of the big decisions I've got right. He would also say that at the moment, he has the backing of shareholders who he says want him to carry on. At the moment, though, it does feel very difficult for there to be any kind of fresh start when you've got Richard Goer, who has been there for an awful long time. He's still there. You've got Vanessa Hudson, who people are willing to give a fresh chance to, but has been at Qantas for like 30 years or so now. Until there is a new faces and there is a major change, it feels very hard to know how they're going to possibly save their reputation.
That's where the problem is. No one's prepared to say, we got it wrong. As a board, as a committee, as a leadership group, we got it wrong. As you rightfully just said a few moments ago, they keep blaming the situation, that this happened because of COVID, this happened because of this. This happened at a lot of other airlines, but a lot of other airlines made smart decisions and focused more on the best outcome for the customer. Rex, for example, just decided to refund all the customers. We can't fly you. Here's your money back. No questions asked.
That's very true. Very true.
It's kind of... I can't see real change happening at Qantas unless Goer goes, a new chair is sworn in, new captain of the ship. Vanessa is the captain of the ship now, and she's going to be directed and closely guarded by Goer in the meantime. Will she really get to put her thumbprint there? I don't know. I think it's time that there's a major shake-up at Qantas.
Wow. On that, on a similar note, we ran another story this week, which was that Peter Harbison, who essentially was one of the founders of Kappa, which is the big consultancy, he's written a kind of a biography of Alan Joyce and Qantas. This is going to be the kind of definitive look at his career from the guy in a position to know. And there was a book extract in the Australian, and he's actually been, while acknowledging the problems, has given a very, very good appraisal of Alan Joyce. And he said that he transformed Qantas from what he called an unwieldy operation into one of the most successful airlines in the world. Again, I'm going to read you out his views here. He said, in recent months, Qantas has been in the firing line for consumer complaints, lawsuits, allegations of political interference, questions over exorbitant executive remuneration, and much more. But today, Qantas is well positioned to continue to be profitable, and without that, there is no airline. It is placed to grow its operations, create employment, and provide social connections. In seeking to make the airline bulletproof, Joyce surely couldn't have done much better. But then he goes on to say, and I think this is quite a fair reflection, he said, Joyce has been divisive, that's true, and he's not broadly popular in the community, mostly quite the reverse. Joyce, the mathematician, with his often tin ear. But there's no doubting his peers in the global airline industry hold him and his achievements at Qantas in the highest regard. So again, there's people here in the industry, and it's almost like that he's suffered enough. I think there's a view when you kind of knock somebody down so much, somebody goes, hold off a bit here. The argument is that, yes, he did some bad things, we got some things wrong, but ultimately those difficult decisions, to use a kind of business cliche, saved the airline.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, Joyce made some really smart aircraft purchasing. He made some amazing leadership changes that benefited and made Qantas a better airline than what it was under Jeff Dixon, who Joyce replaced. As I've said numerous times on this podcast, not everyone is always going to be happy with management.
Well,
But
on that, go on.
at the end of the day, it's a manager's job to manage and make decisions. And I think Joyce made some great decisions for Qantas that sees Qantas where it is today.
What I would say, just to wrap this up, is that Joyce is, I think he's back at home in Ireland, which is why he's not been at the Senate inquiry. And there's been all sorts of palaver over whether he would, they're threatening jail time if he doesn't turn up, which is a bit much. I know he is back at home, I think, because his mother or like a family member is ill. When he does return, the return of the king, the return of the miser. As a journalist, I love this story. It is going to be fascinating because this is the first time we've seen him, or we will see him kind of unhinged in that he's no longer an employee of Qantas. Now, obviously, he is still awaiting decisions on what his kind of his golden goodbye payout will be, so he can't be completely unhinged. But it's going to be very interesting to see how much of what he says is an apology for what happened in the last couple of years of his tenure, and how much of it is him standing by his record. I could see him now using that as an opportunity to defend what he's done and to send his legacy. Yeah,
absolutely. And if people were paying attention, Joyce flew out the night he left Qantas. It was on the news. They crossed live to the airport of him walking through the airport, boarding QF1 or whatever the flight number is, off to the UK to head back to the motherland of Ireland.
A mic drop, isn't it? A mic drop moment from the maestro.
So it's not as if he's been hiding from the Senate inquiry. He resigned from Qantas. The day after, or the day he resigned, he was on a flight out that night. So he's not ignoring the Senate inquiry. He's away having some well-earned rest, which he's bloody well entitled to at the end of the day. It'll be interesting to see what happens when he comes back. Obviously, Qantas have made the decision to potentially claw back some of his payout and bonus. Whilst in the same breath, Goer got a $100,000 pay rise, which I thought was quite interesting. What I'd love to see Qantas do is give their frontline staff a bit of a pay rise too, while they're dishing out pay rises from the top and clawing back money from former execs.
Man of the people, man of the people. Well, I would say, Richard Goer, if you're listening, you're always welcome on the Australian Aviation podcast. So give it to talk to the industry directly, and of course the maestro. Alan Joyce, if you'd like to appear, we would love to have you.
Absolutely. We'd love Joyce in here.
Okay, welcome back. So one of the big stories this week is Rex has kind of finally launched its new frequent flyer program. If you were paying attention, it was Australian Aviation that broke this news a number of weeks ago. So they're launching, it's kind of launched now. It's now live and you can accrue points and you will actually be able to redeem them from the middle of next month. So this is pretty much now all up and running. They're also constructing new airport lounges in Adelaide, Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. Now, they do currently have lounges at some of the bigger airports, but they're only small. They really were lounges that were sort of designed for them being a smaller regional carrier rather than a major one. So this is going to be a huge amount of investment. One of the things that's quite fascinating is how brutal loyalty programs have become in the last few years. So one of the things we saw during COVID was, and I'm not sure which airline was the first, I think it was Qantas. They did lots of offers where you could kind of switch your allegiance. And if you were at a certain tier level, say in the Virgin scheme, you could take that tier level on to Qantas and so on and so forth. And then we had this extraordinary kind of court battle over the new Virgin Velocity CEO, Nick Rolak, who apparently defected from Qantas. And there was all this talk about him. I think he had like an interview for a job at the Qantas frequent flyer and didn't take that and went to Virgin. And there was all sorts of palaver. But this is a very, very brutal world because particularly nowadays, having people locked in on those frequent flyer schemes is incredibly important. Now, Qantas kind of cleaned up during COVID because a lot of businesses moved their account to Qantas, at the point when Virgin went under. Correct. And in the months afterwards, for the very obvious reason that people were like, well, I don't know how safe my money is with Virgin Australia. Virgin Australia managed to obviously come out of that. But now we've got Rex getting involved in this brutal world. And if there's one business I know that likes to scrap, it's Rex. So I'm very keen to see how this goes. So if you, I won't do the full the PR for them. But if you sign up now, you get like your 5,000 points to get you going. And I tried to work out. It's very hard to work out exactly what point means what in these schemes. But essentially, you earn 7 points for every dollar you spend. And potentially, if you can get these last-minute flights, you could potentially get a Melbourne to Sydney flight for 7,400 points. So not beyond the realms of possibility. Even if you fly sort of 7 times or whatever, then you can get an extra flight.
I must admit, I signed up.
Did you really?
Yeah,
Oh, this is great.
I'm proud to say I'm a Rex Flyer Opal member. Rex, if you do want to upgrade my status, I'm not too embarrassed to not ask the question. But I signed up. It was quick and easy to sign up. My membership number is in the 400s, so I'm quite surprised. I signed up the day it opened, and there were already 400-something people above me that signed up and took advantage of it. So... Look, I love Rex. I love everything Rex stands for. I've got some friends that fly for Rex, and I know a lot of people who have flown Rex for the first time because of either A, flight time, B, price, or C, just why not give Rex a go? And they've come off saying they're fantastic. We will definitely fly with them again. So Rex is starting to get a really good name out there as a jet domestic carrier. It had a great name as a regional carrier on the SARBs, its regional operations, but now that more and more people are getting to experience Rex on a domestic triangle route, they're getting a fantastic name. And I think today, and or actually in the last few days over the long weekend here for us, Rex have announced they're increasing some flights to double daily over a Christmas period. Melbourne Hobart's going to double daily. So there's obviously consumer demand there for Rex. People are loving the Rex experience. Give them a go. Sign up.
And so you said the actual signing up process was dead easy because it can be quite confusing, these schemes.
Super easy. Easy to sort out, easy to do, all done online. The only thing that they don't have yet is they don't have a digital card that will be added to the app wallet, but that's coming. Yeah. So that will be rolled out shortly. So super easy to do. No physical cards will be posted, so I like that. It's sustainable as well. It'll all be digital once they've got their Rex app up and running. Good luck to them. What's
interesting is the timing on this, because obviously they are now getting involved and maybe the opportune time. Very similar to when they started flying 737 flights. As the world was struggling, as the planes were dead cheap, they moved in for the kill. This is the time to launch a frequent flyer program, because now you've got all the bad publicity around Qantas. And a lot of people would fly Qantas purely because of a loyalty scheme, and they would not fly Rex because they didn't have one. So it makes absolute sense that now is the time to pounce.
Loyalty, believe it or not, sucks you in. I only shop at Woolworths so I can get my Woolies rewards points converted to Qantas frequent flyer points.
I'm a povo in Coles, so I didn't know you were one of those people.
But the only reason I continue to shop at Woolies is so I can convert my Woolies everyday rewards points to Qantas frequent flyer points.
That's quite interesting.
But it's sucked me in, hasn't it? It's got me held captive. They haven't won my petrol purchasing with BP and all that, but loyalty and rewards mean a lot, and especially in cost of living. A handful of points here or there for ground purchases, i.e. Woolies and stuff like that, can add up to a family holiday at the end of the year. So loyalty is important to Aussie consumers.
What's interesting as well, or the kind of advantage that Rex have, is even though they are expanding into doing 737 flights, they've still only got like 9 planes, and they're still of a size where it's not actually much of an exaggeration to say that almost everybody that works at Rex will know everybody else. That was a little bit of a stretch, but it's a very close-knit thing, and a lot of that comes from it formed of 2 airlines initially. One was like Hazelton Airlines, and there's kind of a family culture thing. Now, the big criticism of the larger airlines is that it's the culture that's broken down. So if you are Rex now, before you get too big and these things become hard to manage, this is your time to sort of strike and win people over. I must say that every time I've flown with Rex, the customer service has been really, really good. Just because people like chat to you. It sounds like a little thing, but they might ask you how your day is. Or one guy we spoke to, he was telling me how he was in like a TV advert or something, and he went on a bit of a rant, but it was nice, and they have time of day for you. And that is kind of where the larger airlines need to get to at the moment.
Yeah, look, exactly. And as I just said, I do have friends that are cabin crew with Rex, and they are always saying to me, Chris, do you know how warming it is when we land, people get off who have just flown Rex for the first time and said, you guys are outstanding. You guys are amazing. We can't wait to fly you again. And he's like, it just, and my friends that fly for Rex are just saying it warms us. It motivates us to be better and to welcome them back. And it's exciting that we're getting a loyal customer base that want to come back and fly with us. So the fact that their crew are going the extra mile to have that chat with passengers on board, it's not that hard.
Not that hard. Well, talking of Rex, we'll talk about another airline in a minute, Bonza. We're just going to go for a quick
legends.
Okay, welcome back. So before we talk about the story, Jake went what I would like to call full Jake in writing this story. His initial headline, which I had to tone down. Well, no, I'll tell you the story first, so you get what he's done, right? So, as you may be aware, or as listeners may be aware, Bonza has this new kind of wet lease agreement with like their sister Canadian airline, Flair, and what that means is that during the off-peak season in Australia, they will send some of their planes to Canada, and then the Canadian airline will, in their off-peak season, send some of their planes down to Australia to help each other out. But one of the kind of a good kind of exclusives that Jake got out of Bonza when he spoke to them was that this reciprocal deal won't actually start for Bonza for quite some time. So the Canadian aircraft are coming down in the summer, but Bonza will only be sending aircraft back when they've got enough to do it. So that's the story there. His original headline was "Fares fair, Bonza to send planes to Flair when airframes are spare." Yeah.
God, if our I know we encourage our listeners to have a drink every time Jake shares a pun, and if we were to encourage them to have a drink every time they read one of Jake's puns, they'd be drunk.
Well, I mean, I do try to, as a professional editor, limit this kind of skullduggery in the written one, but to be fair, and I took out the fares fair bit, but to be fair to him, it does rhyme.
It does rhyme.
And it does work. Bonza to send planes to Flair when airframes are spare. Now, I mean, airframes is, that was pushing it, but it does work.
Yeah, it does work.
And so what we did, we have an editorial chat among all the other brands and titles at the larger Momentum Media company, and I put it out there and said, it's like Big Brother, the public, you decide, do I allow this through? And the unanimous view of the wider editorial team is that this should go ahead. So
wow.
How unprofessional they all, eh? Anyway, it was a good headline, and I'm just giving a shout out there, Jake. But anyway, this is very, very interesting because the story itself, because Bonza obviously now really do have a plan to expand, and it will be the aircraft coming in from Canada that will allow them to sort of start their new hub in the Gold Coast. Now, one of the interesting things is when they launched, it was, I think, technically January the 31st or something, but they had like a staggered rollout that basically meant that it took them 3 or 4 months to really get up to speed. So in a sense, this is the first test they've had. We are now completely out of COVID, no rules whatsoever. They are going into a big summer. Their kind of initial hype around them launching would have subsided. So now they're going to see whether this works or not. I think Bonza have done really, really well, and it's going to be a very intriguing time over the next few months to see how they do.
Yep, 100% agree. I'm a massive fan of Bonza as well. The Bonza legends, painting the skies purple.
It's very good.
Yep.
And definitely, one of the things we said last week is that they will open up so many new routes and possibilities. So for those that are unaware, they operate what they would call a point-to-point model. And what that means is they fly from holiday destination to holiday destination rather than flying from a capital city to another capital city or from a capital city to a destination within that same state. So it's a completely different way of thinking. We also revealed last week some of their kind of sales figures, which basically it looks like in their peak periods, they're doing sort of 90% load factors, and an off-peak, they're doing sort of 70-something%, which is very, very healthy.
It's fantastic. It's extremely healthy.
Obviously, things do vary by airline, but generally speaking, you want to be filling at least 80% of that plane to make money. I mean, you're more of the expert on this.
Yep.
You've been in there. Is that about right?
Yep.
So if they can get to that early doors, that looks like they've got a really, really good future.
Yeah, absolutely they do. And it just goes to show there is room for competition here in Australia.
There is room for competition here in Australia.
Absolutely. And they're doing all of this with 4 aircraft.
Yeah, that is actually quite incredible when you think the aircraft they have versus the amount of routes they're putting on.
Exactly right. And so currently, right now, in the Bonza fleet, there are 4 aircraft. And as you've just shared, they're getting some planes from Flair to open their Gold Coast base and commence their Gold Coast flying later this year. But they're doing this on 4 aircraft. Good on them.
Good on them.
Yep.
Well, on that positive note, I think that's probably about all we've got time for this week. It's a lot quicker when you haven't got Jake, isn't it?
I know, it's a bit sad.
Yeah,
I kind of miss him.
You kind of miss him, yeah, no. Right. Well, anyway, we need to. Have we got no more thank yous, no more shout outs?
No, but don't forget, if you are not a member of Australian Aviation and you would like to be, simply visit our website, www.australianaviation.com.au. Hit the memberships tab. Select the plan that you would like to select, and special discount for all of our podcast video cast listeners. Put in the discount code podcast and you'll receive 20% off any membership level. It's certainly worthwhile becoming a member.
I couldn't agree more. Become a member, sign up and pay our salaries.
Discount code podcast. We need a Christmas party.
There you go. Well, on that note, we will wrap up. But Chris, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And I can't say, Jake, I don't know what to say there.
Well, Adam, thanks for hosting.
Oh, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Anyway, we will be back on this show the same time next week. But for now, from us, goodbye.
Bye-bye.